Welcome to the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. I'm Susan Littlefield. It is an interesting week, and first and foremost, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to so many producers out there that are dealing with continued drought. And then we've got producers that are dealing with excessive amounts of rain right now. It's like one extreme to the other, with no happy medium. We're going to kind of do a little crop update ahead of what's going to be a Pro Farmer Crop Tour next week, and we'll add to it some outside market influences and concerns I heard from producers while in Kansas about what it's going to cost to dry down these crops. We've got that and a whole lot more on today's episode.
It may be small, but this little bean fuels a lot of power. It powers a food industry as a top source of protein. It's a fuel that powers diesel engines with fewer emissions. It powers a state economy and bottom lines. And it powers the rest of the world as a top Nebraska export. Yeah, it may be small, but we're finding more ways for this little bean to power Nebraska.
Joining me, as you can see, is Sue Martin with Ag and Investment out of Clarion, Iowa. And then we head to the state of Kansas, Natchison, as Mike Zuzolo joins us with Global Commodity Analytics. So we're going to talk a little bit crop update. I had the opportunity to spend a couple days in Kansas this week. Having said that, driving down through Nebraska, and I know it's extremely bad to the southwest part of the state, but even in the parts that I drove, dryland has had some serious struggles. It looks like we should be mid-September getting ready to harvest. Soybeans, I described the leaves as a Venus flytrap. It was about the only way I could describe the curling that was happening. Irrigated looks good. But let's head first over to the eastern part of the state, and we'll find out from Sue, how are crops looking for you? Because I understand you got some rain last night.
Well, we did. We had an inch and a half of rain. Came very nice, a little wind with it, but not much. And so far, knock on wood, we've been free of hail this year. But the beans look good, and they always have looked good, better than the corn crop all season long. The corn, once you have damage, you don't put it back. There's thoughts out there that our corn is maybe a little better than what some of us are giving it credit for. But there's a lot of reports of tip back in corn in our area especially, but even down into central Iowa. If you go much south of Des Moines, it just gets progressively worse as you go towards Missouri.
And we hear that that's the trend, really, the farther south you get. Let's head over to the Kansas area. And as you talk, Mike, with folks, I know dryness has been a big concern for them.
Yeah, and we're almost at 50% very poor to poor conditions for the state, and it's been encroaching towards us, which, we've been blessed this season with getting those southeast Nebraska rains and northwest Missouri rains. We've been clipped, really been blessed. Several key rains have come at the right time, but we're starting to feel it pretty substantially now, Susan. And you brought up the irrigated crops. I was talking to a client in northwest Missouri, which I would classify as a garden spot for this area. And we were talking about what Sue was talking about, the tip back, and how much more that's being talked about by agronomists, by the seed companies this year, in my opinion, versus last year. And he said, well, I'm sure my irrigated crop is doing just fine. Well, the next day he sent me pictures of his fields, and he's got, 1.5, 2.5 inches of tip back even in his irrigated fields. And I really think the difference between last year and this year and what's creating this tip back issue is the heat. We've just been so much hotter than we were last year. And that's why my national yield is, below 172 right now. It's mainly because of the heat that we've endured. So that's still not been determined by the trade, as I've talked to a lot of Kansas clients and a lot of Nebraska clients who are in the heart of the drought. I keep telling them, look, between Des Moines and Mankato, Minnesota, that's the area that the trade's really looking at, unfortunately.
Well, we do have that Pro Farmer Crop Tour that gets underway coming up. Do you guys, I'm going to start with you, Mike. Do you expect any surprises as they move their way from South Dakota into Nebraska?
I think they'll confirm what Sue was talking about. I hope they confirm it because I think it's there. It's going to be an important part, this northern leg of the crop that they tour that they usually do. Sometimes Pro Farmer, gets hit a little bit with negative feedback because they don't go far enough south. Well, this year it should be just the ideal place to go.
Right, Sue, for you, looking at how much of a factor does the markets take into this Pro Farmer Tour as they kind of go from the east and west and meet there in the middle?
Well, it's going to be interesting because the Pro Farmer Tour tends to have, they get out in the fields, but they tend to pretty much be optimistic yield year after year. So if they follow that path, they're going to come across with a better yield than what we're thinking. Now, in Nebraska, there's been continuous concern because the rivers are so low. The Platte River is very low. And consequently, you have specifications on how long you can run your pivots, and because they're trying to conserve water further downstream. Well, I think that what's going to be interesting is it's going to be the state of Nebraska. I think that's going to be real interesting to listen to hear just how bad the southern part of South Dakota on down through Nebraska, coming up the western side of Iowa is. It's going to be real interesting to hear the comments. I also think, not Pro Farmer, but Ag Resource just did a tour as well, a 3-day tour. And they came out with kind of a surprise that they thought the corn in Iowa was better than they were expecting. And they thought that the corn in Illinois wasn't quite as good. But here again, what did they do? It's my understanding they kind of moved up along the river on each side, maybe stretched a little bit into, like on Highway 30 or something, into the heart of Iowa. But kind of from the eastern side, you're looking at the best. And I would say in Iowa, it's the very northern and the eastern side of the state where the good crops are.
As we continue here at the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, early harvest, I heard a lot of that talk when I was in Kansas this week covering 2 events. And Mike, what are you hearing from folks? As I know that harvest is underway in parts of Texas, and as it moves north, we're hearing a lot of early harvest going on for those choppers, those custom harvesters out there.
Yeah, and I've even heard a couple clients tell me they may not even chop this year and have zeros, kind of like what happened to some of the clients I work with down in Texas, down by the Rio Grande Valley. I think, Susan, the big thing right now is that the top 4 states of corn, including Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, these top 4 states really produce about 50% of the acres. They're about 46% of the acreage base. And so I really think that until we get to the fall, things that are happening in Kansas are not going to be magnified very much unless those other 4 states have a lot of problems, which I do expect there will be more in at least 2 of those 4 states.
Well, in my neck of the woods, I know that the dairy is going to start chopping as early as next week, and it's about 3 weeks earlier than originally had been planned. Let's talk some outside market influences. Sue, what are you hearing that's going to affect this trade as we continue to hear weather concerns in the European Union? We know that there's still further conflict in the Black Sea region.
Well, I think that the market's been busy keying in the psychological thought of shipping grain through the Black Sea. I think that was to be expected, that it would have a negative impact on the market. But basically, I don't think they're going to, it's not a normal year for them, and they're not going to have near the crop going out. It's going to be interesting to hear just how well the rest of the grain moves through now that they've got the wheat pretty much harvested. But when you look at France, their crop condition ratings are at 50%, good to excellent for corn. A year ago, it's at 91%. There's just problems all over the world. You look at Argentina, and they're experiencing the potential of a third La Nina. It's not going to help them out too much. Their wheat and their barley is getting, it's expected that crop is not going to have all the moisture that it needs in some of the parts of the country. You will see what La Nina basically gives to Brazil, because usually La Nina is not good for Brazil. And Brazil's had one complete calendar year of issues. And is it possible they go into a second one? And that's coming off the cusp of the U.S. having a crop, just not a stellar crop when you're into the problems that China's enduring right now, with the Yangtze River horribly low, record low. You're looking at the Rhine River, very low. There's just problems around the whole world. And so this is a time when we need good record production, and we're just not getting it anywhere.
Well, Mike, too, the way the stock market's been trading as of late, I hear a lot of folks having concerns of how that's going to affect their bottom line from a ag perspective.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, the inputs are still running super high. I talked to a good guy in Illinois this afternoon, and he said he's still running almost 40% higher than this past year for 2023 inputs, and he just doesn't know how that's going to work out. I think when you bring out the outside markets, I think the wheat market really did a good job Friday in bringing us back from the edge, from the abyss. I would even say, technically speaking, Susan, we had lost our July and August support lines, trend lines, monthly chart supports in both hard red and soft red wheat, and we were able to gain those back, especially in hard red. I think that's the thing to watch as we go forward with the Pro Farmer Tour. I'd like to see the wheat and the corn come in and support the soybeans after the negative USDA report. I think since it's the soybean show, I think it's really important the producers realize USDA's got those world stocks over 100 million metric tons, and that's only the second time since 2018, going all the way back to the mid-'80s, that we've had world soybean stocks that much. And Brazil's ramping up to even be a bigger player in soybeans this next year with the help of Russia and China.
Real quick, Sue, natural gas dry down costs. Is there some concerns that they're for producers?
Well, I think that when we go forward into the fall, I think that the natural gas prices aren't going to be as cheap as everybody would like them to be. I think that you've got China on the cusp of making a U-turn and becoming back stronger in their economy, which is going to put competition in for the crude and what have you.
Well, thanks to both of you for joining us today. As we always remind folks, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's been the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup right here on the Rural Radio Network.